What does it mean? What does it mean to be great? We hear that word all the time. The concept of greatness is everywhere. Some of you might remember this, former high school classmates or teachers that are in the room. But we had a principal who said this over the intercom to the entire high school every single day. Make it a great day or not. The choice is yours. Nike had a global advertisement campaign that lasted years, labeled Find Your Greatness, when it comes to athletic preparation and performance. Alexander the Great is a historical figure famous for conquering armies and territories at a really young age all over the world, expanding to one of the biggest empires ever to be known on the planet. My point is, greatness is a historical and cultural ideal. But what does it even mean to be great? More on that in a moment. In our passage from Mark today, Jesus and his disciples were heading south to Jerusalem. We're a little over the halfway point in Mark, and he and his friends are on their way to the holy city. And apparently at some point on their journey, the disciples got into a little bickering with one another. Eventually they came to a town called Capernaum, and Jesus asked them, "What were you bickering about? What were you arguing about on the road?" And to this question, the disciples fell sheepishly silent. And it appears Jesus knew what they were arguing about. They were arguing with one another about who among them was the greatest. Can you imagine? Grown disciples arguing about their resumes. So Jesus called them over, sat down, and then perhaps sighing in annoyance, said, "Listen, whoever wants to be first must be servant of all." And then he took a child and he put it among them. And taking it into his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me and the Father who sent me." It's a confounding, attention-grabbing response by Jesus. Instead of getting into their debate and weighing in on their resumes about who is the greatest disciple of all, Jesus responded by putting a little child, a symbol of the least, in their midst, as if to say, "You are arguing about who is the greatest. Pay attention to the vulnerable, to the needy. That's the greatest." One might wonder why a child. Why does Jesus use a child to make his point and settle the disciples' argument about greatness? One could go a lot of directions with this, but one emphasis I will make is that at this time in history, children, especially poor children, were some of the lowest members of the social order. One biblical scholar explains that little children, especially orphaned children, which they speculate this child must have been, a child of the streets. Orphaned children at this time were considered to be weak and insignificant and costly liabilities. I know that's a dreadful view of children. But to understand this, you have to think about children in cold, ancient economic terms. Economically and militarily speaking, a small orphaned child has no utility. Such a child is completely dependent, making them a liability at best and a drag on resources at worst. In antiquity, and sadly far too often still today, poor children were especially viewed like this. No money, no land, no military, no economic skill sets, useless. Again, I'm speaking entirely in cold, survivalist, ancient economic terms, all to highlight that to welcome and prioritize such a child like that is Jesus' example of radical and sacrificial generosity. To care for the vulnerable, even and especially as they have little or nothing to transactionally offer. To Jesus, that is to be great. It's apropos to have a baptism today, because even a meek little child or toddler or infant who can't really contribute anything yet to God is great to God, deserving of God's great attention and promise. At any rate, another scholar puts it this way. In this scene, the whole notion of greatness is redefined. The disciples were arguing with one another about status, success, failure, winning and losing, and Jesus sets a child in their midst. Where the disciples have argued about greatness, they are redirected by Jesus to open their arms to the powerless. And by placing a child as representative of the vulnerable and needy, Jesus also directs our attention to what greatness is in this life. To be great is to love and care for others, especially those who have little to offer in return, the suffering and the vulnerable among us. That's a massive ethical point that Jesus is making for where he sends us and expects us to go with our lives. But it's also a major existential point for us today. We spend so much of our lives chasing accomplishment, success, wealth, accolades, status, and more. And here, Jesus offers us an existential warning for when that stuff and those pursuits consume our lives. And on this point, I refer to a commencement speech by the pastor and author Rick Warren. And I quote, "I have stood at the bedside of maybe thousands of people as they took their last breath. What people say in their final moments, they don't mess around. And when people are dying, in their last words, no one has ever said, 'Pastor, bring me my trophies. I want to look at them one last time.' No one has ever said, 'Bring me my college graduation certificate and my job titles and my pay stubs. I want to take a look at them one more time.' When people are dying and they know their time is short, what they want in that room is not trophies and achievements. What they want are the people they love. Eventually, we might figure it out. It's all about love. It's all about relationships." End quote. In other words, folks, the greatest life that we live and the greatest legacy we leave, it is not in the accolades we receive, but it is in the love we give. Do we want to be great with our lives? Our church forefather, Martin Luther, might sum it up best as he wrote over 500 years ago, and I quote, "For you are powerful, not that you may make the weak weaker by oppression, but that you may make them powerful by raising them up and defending them. You are wise, not in order to laugh at the foolish and thereby make them more foolish, but that you may undertake to teach them as you yourself would wish to be taught. For this is Christ's example for us." End quote. And for what it's worth, friends, you want to know how to be great? Jesus, with his love, his life, his death, and his resurrection, has proven that you are already great to him. Now, with that same love, go be great to others. Amen.